Good morning, everybody. I'm going to introduce Dr. Paula Mueller, who will begin the presentation from the IEEE group, the local group at New Jersey Coast Section. And our topic is Health and Medical Device Literacy for Everyone. Welcome, Paula Mueller.
Thank you. Thank you, Kit. So good morning, everyone. We're very happy to share with you information this morning. We are, as Kit mentioned, our presentation is Health and Medical Device Literacy for Everyone. We are IEEE group, so it's the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineering, and in particularly we are part of the, thank you, Kit. We are part of the site. So basically, this is a special interest group for humanitarian technology. And IEEE has its roots a long time ago, as you can see, in 1884, when at the very beginning, when electricity it just started becoming a major influence in society. And just to share with you, many of the roots from IEEE, and particularly our large New Jersey coast section, has its roots here in New Jersey, in Homedale, Bedminster, basically all the Bell Labs. That now the big building in Homedale is called Bell Works. But the whole building at one time was meant to host around 6,000 employees, all engineers, scientists that were creating the future of technology in all type of areas, not only communication with the telephone, even the internet, and currently artificial intelligence and machine learning. All of those trace their roots back to home, to New Jersey, your home. So I really appreciate that your interest in technology, and we're very excited to share with you our expertise. So the outline for today, we will have an introduction. We're going to discuss medical devices and interpretation of their measurements. We want to hear from you about the future. We want to hear your questions. And then at the end, you are going to be collecting your own measurements, like Dr. Kit August shared with you the spreadsheet where we want you that you collect the data with, I believe they have thermometers and weight scale. So please go back. So let me talk a little bit about your survey. Thank you so much, all of you who shared your information with us. We received 79 responses. Thank you so much. And just to summarize, the majority of you are very familiar with medical devices. The ones that you mentioned the most were the stethoscope, blood pressure, glucose meter, pulse oximeter, and thermometer. But some of you also refer to X-ray machine, MRI, magnetoresonant imaging, smart scale, insulin pump, and defibrillator. Many of you are aware of medical conditions because of your own experience or from someone close to you. In some cases, medical devices are used to monitor or treat the condition. With respect to language, some of you have family members or yourself speak other languages. Quite interesting, the gamma of all the languages that you speak. Uh, and the vast majority of you responded yes when asked if it will be helpful that health information is provided in multiple languages. COVID-19 affected the health of many directly as a consequence of the infection, but also the treatment of other health conditions. And also in how much help a person may need during a medical intervention. COVID brought challenges, as you described. In such situation, it added extra difficulty to follow the treatment, and it showed the need to improve the healthcare system. Some of you even made reference to health system in other countries and how those practices can be applied to the US. So thank you very, very much for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate it. And the objective of this survey was really to set the mindset and the direction of the discussion from today. COVID-19 was and still is an unprecedented time that brought attention to our health and our health system, and made us take care of the diagnosis and treatment condition in a different way. Unfortunately, many procedures were postponed, and COVID-19 itself added a lot of challenges. This awareness makes that everyone is responsible and must become his or her own health advocate and the health advocate for their loved ones. So what we wanted to share with you is really that you start thinking about all the aspects that affect health. And it's not just a snapshot in time, but it's also the whole history of the person, the condition. And that's why we want to introduce to you the concept of social determinants of health that involve not only, as I mentioned, the health condition, but the economic stability, the education access and quality, the healthcare access and quality, the neighborhood and built environment, and the social and community context. This is an important aspect, and we want to that you also consider inclusion and diversity. As you see, these three bullet points, we will talk a little bit more through the slides, but it's very important that we're all involved. And basically, we consider a person-centered, so targeted conditions, targeted treatments that are based on the person, the individual, and not just a general a concept that is applied to everyone, because we have learned, and especially over the last 21 months, that we really have to have the concept of inclusion and diversity. Please, the next slide, Keith. So the challenges, and that was also what we spoke with you about languages, because we have a lack of health literacy. So as you see the statistic here on this slide, we have a lot of people which English proficiency is low. They also have, not only in terms of language literacy, but we also have people with vision trouble, hearing trouble, but we also know that the United States, based on the 2020 census, it has a very high diversity index, like you see, 61.1%. 100% will be that everyone is different, but 61.1 is quite large. And here some statistics for Latinos, but this apply also to other ethnic groups. Nearly 6 in 10 run into language or cultural barriers when it relates to healthcare. And also it has been seen that people who live in neighborhoods where little English is spoken are at higher risk of poor health and early death. So the opportunities that, as I mentioned before, is to create a system where we have a person-centered care, transparent designs for well-being. So we want to include health and medical device literacy, a very important culturally and linguistically appropriate system, class design for dignity and identity, increase the diversity and representation, reduce bias in research and literature and projects, and increase diversity and representation in technology and artificial intelligence, machine learning. So next slide, and probably here, Dr. August, you can continue with the presentation.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I also forgot to introduce Dr. Thomas Willis, who's also with us today. He's an electromagnetic specialist in engineering, also works at AT&T, which is now Shannon Labs, I believe. It used to be Bell Labs, but now they call it Shannon Labs. And he's a person who spends a great deal of time inventing, innovating, just like Paula does. Paula is also an inventor. That's something we all have in common. We love to think about new things. So this is it's the reason why we get up in the mornings to think about good things, new things. And so thank you for welcoming us to your classroom today. One of the main topics in healthcare that's like a nice place to begin is to describe what is homeostasis in our bodies, in our health system. Almost every system has a level of homeostasis where things are in balance. And if we consider the fact that things might be perturbed or disrupted, then we want to be able to measure and identify what the differences might be. And in the case of body temperature, we're familiar with the thermometer. You're going to be doing a little experiment with that today. Or we may be looking at the measurement of certain byproducts in our blood, such as the level of glucose, which a glucose meter can be useful in helping us measure these items. Why are we interested in this? Because we want to be concerned about how our immune system is being affected by things in our environment or things that are going on in our bodies. And so we want to be able to understand how bacteria or viruses might be affecting us. We want to look at things like blood pressure to get an idea about how our autonomic nervous system is responding to various influences inside and outside. We want to make sure that we maintain a level of hydration and fluid, because we need that for our cells to function and for our bodies to function adequately. And of course, that relates directly to the environment. What is the supply of our water? How is that water supply managed? What's going on with the quality of that water? Do we have access to it? And also things like breathing patterns, which aren't just a matter of inhaling and exhaling. There's a lot going on there with the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, things that we have in our environment, like HVAC systems, the temperature outside, the things that we're doing, interacting with sports and work. And of course, the removal of wastes and toxins from our body. These things are all the complex things that are going on in our systems, and that we use simple instruments to try to get a clue about what is going on within those systems. So if we take a closer look and consider how we might want to redesign these systems to help people understand what this individual device means in relationship to the entire body system, we can begin by helping people to understand health and well-being through the instrument itself. And so we decided that it might be a very good idea to take the instrument, use the label on the instrument to go into a database and then pull up information about that device, and then manage to figure out how to personalize that to the individual. So are you a young person, an old person? Are you a child who may be suffering from a fever? And how do we then tailor the information to help you deal with whatever's going on at that moment, help you understand the context, help you to understand what this measure might mean? Because especially during COVID, what we've noticed is that people have to care for themselves and their loved ones in their own home, or they have to interact with the doctor over telemedicine, because there's not as much opportunity to deal with going into the doctor's office and having routine checkups. So the devices that we decided to begin with are the thermometer, the blood pressure cuff, the pulse ox, and the smart scale. So in terms of the body temperature, some things we wanted to bring to your attention. Why are these things really important? Well, it turns out that there's not really a single normal body temperature. And one of the articles that we've shared with you is a review of studies of large numbers of people at different ages, using different instruments to measure the body temperature. And over a range of time, these studies found some very interesting results. The bottom line here is that as you get older, your body is not able to mount a temperature as effectively as when you're younger. And that's sort of a normal thing for older people. So in the case like now, we have a pandemic and we're using body temperature to give an indication of what's the matter. We really can't rely on body temperature to tell us when something's wrong. If the person has a fever, then you know they have a fever and you can rule in a problem. But if they don't have a fever, you can't rule out a problem. And those are very important points about these simple measures and what the issues might be. So another thing is the environmental temperature affects the way that our body responds, and the way it responds not only in the short term, but in the long term. And what you'll notice on the left side, you'll see some ambient temperature ranges from different cities around the globe. And what you'll notice in the bar chart below is that even when there's a moderate cold snap, people die. People have significant health challenges when the temperature changes in the environment. So these things about the homeostasis are really critical to our life, our quality of life, our longevity. And I would recommend that people consider these things when they're thinking about not just biomedicine, medicine, and so forth, but also all the other sciences and engineering topics that you're interested in. Another way to look at the same information is to think about how children might be affected by the environment or by their body temperature. And there's a nice little pink bath thermometer in this image at the top in the middle. And one thing that you might want to think about is when people immerse themselves into the water, sometimes they can't give feedback to you, like if they're an infant or a young child, they may not be able to tell you that the water's too warm or too cold. But if you have such a little instrument in the bathtub, then you can keep a very good track of what's going on with that water temperature and make sure you don't cause unnecessary stress on that person. In old age, we might not be able to respond. We might not be able to speak about our experiences, whether we have dementia or whether we're ill. These things are very important for the caregivers and for the people who work in this field to be aware of. Things like dementia may interfere with our ability to communicate and with our vulnerability to various measures and environmental experiences. Things like alcohol and drugs could suppress our respiration, for example, and respiration is essential for homeostasis. So, and as I mentioned before, being immersed in the water, the surface area of your body, depending on how large you are, how young you are, the surface area of your body is losing heat when you're immersed in water because the environment has changed and your body is responding to that. One of the other articles that, a series of articles we've provided to you in our journal share, Potter has done a lot of studies of military experiences. People have to wear certain kinds of clothing, do certain kinds of activities, and what can we expect to happen when they're under that kind of stress? And if you notice at the bottom, it's very tiny. You need a magnifying glass, which is why we handed to you this entire presentation so you can read along and then follow up with some of the journal articles. But there's a great deal of research going on in this field where you can help people who do special kinds of work to understand how the environment might affect them and to make sure that they're safe while they're at work. These are very important careers and very important applications of biomedical engineering. One of the other things we spoke about earlier is diversity, and certain instruments aren't really what we call fit for duty because if you go home and you're measuring your own pulse ox now because there is a crisis going on in the world and a lot more people are expected to care for themselves at home, you might notice that these instruments are not really giving a very complete point of view about the oxygen circulating in your blood. And that's because some instruments, like a pulse ox, is expecting a very, very stable environment to do its measure. But if you happen to be anemic and you don't have the same level of blood cells in your body carrying oxygen as a person who's not anemic, then this machine is not going to function because it's looking for a ratio of blood cells that carry oxygen to the ones that don't carry oxygen. And if you don't have the same number, the ratio is going to be different. So you're not going to get an accurate reading. The other thing is if your skin color is darker than the sensor is capable of interpreting, you'll get a poor reading result. And if you look at the chart in the middle, you can see that people who are Black patients versus patients who are white have a very different result in terms of the accuracy of the reading. The reason why we know this is because when these people presented in the hospital and they had a blood gases analysis conducted, the results from the blood gas analysis was vastly different from the result from the pulse ox. And of course, what we can take away from this is that the device applications may not be the only piece of information that you should pay attention to when you're considering the health status of the person. And this is a wide open area for research. I was reminded recently that heart rate variability is another kind of more complicated analysis that can be done that can give you a warning that your autonomic nervous system is not working properly. And so there's one article I included in the package that was military research done with heart rate variability. It predicts like a day ahead of time before you're showing symptoms of COVID it gives you an idea that you're coming down with something that's affecting your autonomic nervous system. And this is important to consider. Another thing, maybe Dr. Willis might take a moment at some point today, at this moment maybe, to talk about how there are actually standards and ways of conducting measurements of things like skin color, and they're useful in many, many applications like television cameras and other kinds of cameras. But we can apply this to biomedical engineering and do a much better job, I think, in the future. These are things you might want to think about. Dr. Willis, you want to make a couple of comments here?
Well, Kit, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, I mean, when these devices are being, certified or tested for use, you do need to keep in mind that you've got a wide diversity of patients that are going to potentially be using these things. And unfortunately, often those tests do not have everyone, properly represented. And then you can end up with, sort of skewed statistics and skewed calibrations for the instruments, which, don't serve all patients well. So it's definitely a thing that needs to be worried about when these devices are being developed and tested.
Thank you. So this is an example of like when you see the title of the article, it may give you the idea that they're looking at every kind of race when they're doing a study that involves race. But in reality, if you look more closely, you see that the races that they're identifying are very also narrowly defined. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the study necessarily, but it means you can't necessarily apply this study to every aspect that you might be considering in your application. And in this case, they were concerned with things like they suggested that these types of measures might be useful for people who are developing prosthetics. And maybe that's true. Maybe if you're developing prosthetics that have to match someone's skin in a certain region, then you want to know what kinds of skin colors are present in that region. And that would make this sort of study helpful and applicable. But you then want to be careful about where you take this research information and where you might be using it geographically, or what kind of application you're using it for. And then you want to remember all the time that there's a limited data set in the original population that you studied. And that's how people get into issues with things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. You want to make sure that your data sources are curated and they're constantly updated and monitored for any kinds of perturbations that might be taking place in your application. So now we have a opportunity for you to ask questions if you have any questions that we might be able to help with at this moment.
All right. Anyone have questions? Not one.
I think the question is, where is the cappuccino? Where's the espresso? That's the question. Yeah.
We have a question. So
Okay.
you want to ask? You want me to ask? So is there like an organization that oversees the development of the products and like the design as you guys are coming up with it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are so many, it's a big question. It's a regulated industry. Medicine is a regulated industry, healthcare is a regulated industry, which means there are lots of organizations concerned about what you develop. And when you begin your research, you typically apply to the institutional review board to tell them what your plan is to do your experiments. So that's an institution by itself that gives you permission to do your study. So you have to know how to design a study to make patients safe, to make whoever your test subjects might be safe, to make sure that all of your information is handled properly and securely. And then if there are results that you want to report, that your peers evaluate. So if you submit a study, the finished study to journal articles, the peers will review your article and make sure that what you've done was reasonable, that your outcome is described correctly and accurately, and then they'll publish it, which is where you wind up seeing these things in journals. And then hopefully you can find someone who might be able to commercialize your product if you happen to be doing this type of work for a corporation. There are people within the company that would decide whether or not that product suits their business model or their needs. And then you have to submit it to like FDA, for example, for process to be included there. And I think Dr. Willis can talk a little bit about UL and EU and other kinds of regulations for just a moment. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kit. Yeah, I mean, the Food and Drug Administration from the federal government oversees a lot of these things. Certainly all drugs are overseen by that organization. There are other professional and industry organizations that, sometimes they have the power of law. Sometimes they can only make recommendations for sort of best practices. But, the American Medical Association would be, for doctors would make recommendations on best practices. The IEEE makes recommendations on best practices and also develops standards, which, hopefully, companies are adhering to. And OSHA gets involved in some of these things from the federal government. So, yeah, there isn't just one organization that oversees these things. It's kind of a complex mixture of both federal and organizations, as well as professional and industry organizations. UL would be, Underwriters Laboratory would be involved in the electrical safety of various devices. You don't want them malfunctioning and harming folks, or if they're used improperly or can be easily used improperly that could potentially harm folks, you want to avoid those sorts of situations as well. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Dr. Willis. And just to thank you very much for reminding me, but this project is actually a pipeline into IEEE standards. This team is involved with IEEE standards. And so we're trying to introduce a standard about skin color so that people can understand skin color from a number of different ways and a number of different perspectives, and that we will actually try to share internationally ways to measure skin color so that when you use a particular device or when you implement a certain process, for example, in dermatology, that you consider skin color and objective measures so that mistakes don't happen as easily as they happen today. So thank you very much for that question.
I have a question.
And just a quick comment, Kit, you also brought to my attention that the FDA is considering software as a medical device, and therefore is also going to be regulated.
Exactly. A lot of these, what we call devices, are now actually living in the cloud or in software. So the AI and ML, the artificial intelligence and machine learning, are now going to reside outside of a single device. They're going to reside in the cloud. They're going to be done with edge technology, like maybe at your home, as well as in the neighborhood, as well as at your hospital, as well as at your doctors, as well as like nationwide or in the laboratory. And then those things have to be conceived differently and regulated differently. And right now there are a lot of calls for suggestions, recommendations from industry and from experts as to how to regulate that aspect. And many people are pushing back on it. Of course, people who've been in the industry for a long time are pushing back. So at some point it will become real and an issue that people have to address. And they're calling that software as a medical device. FDA has already staked out this area. They've already just decided what it's going to look like, but those regulations have not yet come about. That's right now a moving target at this moment. Thank you, Paul.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what type of devices and design have maybe you guys worked on personally in your career that maybe you can share with the students?
Dr. Mueller, can you talk about your device that you have?
Yes. So I developed, for example, I worked years ago at SiriusXM satellite radio, and what I work on it was all the software that allows the digital radio to basically manage, compress, and even transmit the music and convert music into digital, and then manage it in the order that we are able to use the bandwidth that the satellites provide, which is limited in comparison with the whole internet now with the streaming. But basically just make engineering decisions that you make the compromise between using the bandwidth and being good enough that the ear and our intelligence can basically not able to notice significantly, at least, the distortions that the compression produces. And lately, I started my own company developing a communication device for older adults. And basically, this is a screen like a picture frame that allows older adults, people with disability, and even people with dementia and Alzheimer's to be able to communicate with their families through video conference without any knowledge of technology. Basically, this is a device that is always connected, and it allows them to have, it's like their video phone or video communication device, and the families operate that remotely from their smartphones through an app that allows them to just press a button on their smartphone and show up on the screen of their loved ones and be able to start a conversation. And during COVID, when we were all separated and basically we had challenges visiting our loved ones, that was the way for them to communicate. Now the device had other capabilities. It's a touch screen that allows older adults, again, think about your grandparents or grandparents that don't have knowledge of technology. This device allows them to very easily engage, use the touch screen, and all of that is with the concept of simplicity for them to stay engaged and communicated with their family members. Thank you.
Dr. Willis, can you spend a couple seconds telling us about your invention?
Okay, sure, Kit. I mean, I work for AT&T, so we're very interested in supporting, mobile phones, smartphones, and so forth. And with the sort of widespread deployment of smartphones, many people have them. There's lots of opportunities for people to develop apps that interact with these devices and can help you with your care. I think you mentioned this earlier in the talk. I think one very exciting possibility here is, having a scanner that scans a barcode on a medical device on your phone, and then because your phone knows things about you, it can tailor what it's going to tell you about that device. So, for example, if there's a scale, a scale that you step on that may run some current through your body to try to measure your body mass index, and that scale is perfectly safe for most healthy people, but it's not a device that someone with maybe an implanted, like a pacemaker, should be using, because the currents running through your body, which in a healthy person are no issue, but if it could interfere with the operation of that pacemaker, your smartphone knows you've got a pacemaker, so it would bring up right to the front on the screen that, hey, this scale is not a device that you should be using. So being able to tailor the information about the devices to the individual patient, I think is a real a real great potential for the use of smartphones and a database about a wide collection of medical devices. Also, sometimes we get involved with how do radio signals potentially affect people, and that's another very important issue. When you're using your smartphone, it is sending radio signals back somewhere, and you're near your smartphone, so you're going to be exposed to those radio signals as well. We need to make sure that whatever you're exposed to is going to be safe for you. So those are the kinds of issues I get involved with at work at AT&T. Back to you, Kit.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for a couple of devices that I've been involved with in the past?
The bell's going to ring in like a minute, and then there's going to be like announcements. So not for this class, but I'll see you guys again for.
Okay, and you have your assignments to measure and to document, and then we'll do some analysis of the data, and we'll get back to you about that at another time. Thank you so much for welcoming us today, and we wish you a wonderful day.
Of course. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. These kids are great, and they were looking forward to hearing from you guys. So thank you for taking the time out.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll see you guys later.